Ready to die?
Yes, yes, yes.
Kill me, you black king. Do it now or you will be checkmated in your next move.
I surrender.
Well, that was a letdown.
White brilliantly offered a spectacular queen sacrifice by capturing on g6 that would have led to checkmate in 2 with the help of his rook and minor pieces if black accepted it, or to a quick mate with queen to g7 if black were to ignore white's queen and played any other move. This is one of the few games in which multiple blunder moves were played intentionally by black due to his naive optimism that he could win the game in a bad position, and white brilliantly used those blunders to win that game. This game was played between Alexander Alekhine and Emanuel Lasker back in 1934's chess tournament, where Alekhine ruthlessly took advantage of Lasker's intentionally played bad moves to win the game. The reason why Lasker played a series of bad moves is because he wanted to win the tournament while being in a bad position to get enough points to come out on top of the tournament and take first place. White opens the game with the queen's pawn opening. This is one of white's best ways to initiate the game. After black responded with d5, white offered his pawn with the queen's gambit. As we know by now, this gambit intends for white to expand and take control of the center if black accepts the sacrificial pawn. Black plays the queen's gambit declined. This is a standard response by black if he wants to decline white's pawn offer when faced with the queen's gambit. Although this opening is the most reliable response for black, it has the downside of blocking the way for his bishop, and white will attempt to exploit its passivity. Both sides are developing their pieces normally, the only difference being that black developed his king side minor pieces intending to castle to remove his king from the vulnerable central position.
Now the rookie boy will move.
This rook move may seem odd, however this is a brilliant move by white because he attempts to hold off the development of his bishop. If he were to develop the bishop instead of his rookie boy, then black would have had the perfect opportunity to capture on c4 and force white to move his bishop a second time to recapture, which will leave him in a bad opening position. Black, however, knows what white wants and withholds the capture on c4. In this position, white couldn't find a useful move he could play to delay his bishop's development. So he moved the bishop to d3, allowing black to capture his pawn and be in a better position because white is forced to recapture.
Now you die.
Black brilliantly offers an exchange of minor pieces. In this position, white has more space on the chessboard, and trades will help black by freeing up squares his pieces can use to expand further on the board, allowing black to have a much better chance of victory. Knowing black's plan and unwilling to trade more of his pieces, white saves his horsey. Black, however, remains persistent and insists on trading pieces with white, which he declines again.
Ready to die.
This position has been played hundreds of times in countless chess games, and the most natural move here for black is queen to b4, hitting the pawn and checking the king. After white plays queen d2, black trades queens, and when the king recaptures, black can place his rook to d8, taking advantage of the king's placement, and this will lead to black having the upper hand against white. It's important to note that even though white could have captured the queen with his horsey, it will be a mistake, because then this will allow black to initiate an attack on the center with his pawn, and after both players exchange pawns, black would have invaded on white's territory with his knight, attacking the bishop simultaneously. Then white will be forced to give away his bishop and castle kingside, because if he were to save his bishop, then we have a dazzling fork with horsey on d3, forcing white to lose his rook and castling rights. Instead, black plays pawn to e5. We know that black wanted to win this tournament while being in a bad position to score more points in the end. That's why he chose to keep the queens on the board, even though he knew that trading his queen with white's was the best he could have done. In the continuation we showed earlier, the willingness of black to keep the queens on the board when it makes the most sense to trade them will lead to his loss. White immediately takes the given opportunity to castle, removing his king from the dangerous queen b4 check black could have used. Now black needs to make another critical decision. He can capture on d4 or advance on e4 with his pawn and attack the horsey. In the game, black captures on d4, but if he were to move his pawn on e4, it would have been better for him position-wise, but not by a lot, because white's overall position is way better, and if black had chosen this pawn move, white will simply move his knight to d2. Then after some proper preparations, white could also advance his f-pawn forward and add an additional attacker. This could lead to a lot of pressure on the f-file, especially if black were to capture the pawn and allow white to unleash his rook. After the recapture, we see an interesting open position. An open position is when there are no pawns occupying the center, which means that there is no central pawn tension. These types of open positions are very unique due to the way they are supposed to be played. In open positions, the goal of both players is piece activity, especially their major pieces. It's simply a race between who will get his major pieces on the open files first, who will create a better activity for his minor pieces by moving them to soft squares where they could hit all of the opposing opponent's weak spots. For white, one of those squares in particular is the d6 square, and he uses it later on for critical piece activity of both his queen and knight. Lastly, they should also aim to prevent their opponent from activating their pieces and denying them control of the open files. After that, whichever player comes on top, he will have the advantage, and then it's only a matter of time before they exploit sore spots and weaknesses in their opponent's position. Right now we have a very critical position. A lot of players would prefer to trade their queens here. However, if black were to force a queen trade and after white recaptures, he will have control over the open d file first, which will be a very difficult position for black, and even though he can challenge white by moving his rook to the file, then white will simply put his horsey on d6 and pressure all of black's weak points. The strongest move for black in this position is pawn to g6 attacking the knight. This is the best move because then this horsey won't have a good square to go to and white will then struggle to keep his advantage. However, black played one of the worst moves he could have played. This move is queen to b6. Just like in this moment here earlier when black intentionally didn't force a queen trade because he wanted to win in a bad position, here he also played this move intentionally, knowing very well that it was the worst move he could have picked. Now white uses this opportunity to brilliantly claim the center with his queen. The queen is extremely powerful when placed on this square, not to mention that she's also hitting black's hanging knight. White brilliantly creates a checkmate threat with his queen and horsey. With all of his pieces active now, white is aiming to create soft spots in black's position that he could use to his advantage. He also brought his remaining piece in the action by taking control of the d file. This is exactly what both players were aiming to achieve in this open position, and white was the one who managed to accomplish it due to black's earlier intentional queen b6 blunder, and now he's paying the price for his naive optimism. White also successfully boxed in black's remaining pieces, and now they are unable to effectively participate in the game. With soft spots created on black's king side, white slides his queen forward, menacingly approaching black's king and using the pin of the pawn to his advantage. White brilliantly places his horsey on d6 and targets all of black's weak spots. We see that in this position there are no good moves available for black, and his last two king moves are a clear indicator that he has no idea what move he should play in this position. Now all white has to do is to include more pieces in his attack to completely overwhelm his opponent. This move is another critical mistake black makes, which allows white to initiate a spectacular attack that leads to a forced mate in a couple of moves, and his brilliant rook lift is the core component of his attack. With knight to f5, white forces black's king to h8 while having the f7 square covered by his bishop. After the king steps to h8, the finishing blow is a brilliant queen offering by white. It is in this position that black resigned. The dazzling checkmate threats are simply overwhelming, and black has no way to defend against all of them. Not only is white threatening to checkmate on g7 with his queen and horsey in his next move, but the critical point is that if the queen is captured by the pawn, the spectacular finisher is rook to h3 check. Black blocks the check with his knight. It's the only legal move because all of the squares the king can go to are covered by white's pieces, and then the rook captures the knight, delivering the checkmate with the help of white's minor pieces. Alekhine took advantage of Lasker's intentionally played blunders by taking control over the entire chessboard and brilliantly won the game.